Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I am Emily O'Neill, and I am the Elevate Program Coordinator here at the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering, also known as ATSE. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from where I am joining from today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, as well as to acknowledge the traditional owners of whatever country you are joining us from today. As we come together to share and discuss our knowledge and experience, we also recognise the traditional knowledge and the deep history of Australia's first peoples as the world's oldest surviving culture and Australia's first scientists and technologists. Before we get on to today's webinar, I just want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We would like to remind all attendees that they have agreed to abide by ATSE's Code of Conduct, including as you enter your questions into the Q&A channel. This webinar will be recorded and the recording will be made available on ATSE's YouTube channel shortly after today's session. We're also happy to send that link through to all registrants. Captions are enabled today, so if you require them, they should pop up at the bottom of your screen. As the session progresses, the feedback surveys will be shared in the chat. Please take a moment to complete them. We are keen for this to be an interactive session, so please be sure to submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen at any point throughout the webinar. Before I hand over to today's moderator and our brilliant panelists, I thought I'd share a little bit about me. I don't have an agricultural science background. I did a Bachelor of Visual Art and Science majoring in chemistry at the Australian National University. I briefly worked as a communications officer at Australian Science Innovations while I was studying, and ran the social media for Curious Minds program, which is a mentoring program for Year 9 and 10 female identifying students living in regional and rural areas who were interested in STEM. I discovered I had a passion for STEM programs and improving accessibility in STEM. I then finished my studies and did my honours in interactive installation and cybernetics at the ANU School of Art. From there, I took up an internship in the Elevate program team here at ATSE, looking at how data could be used to tell a story on the impacts of the program and the ways in which we can improve it and improve accessibility of STEM. I then moved into the coordinator role late last year, where I've been continuing this work. We are lucky to have a couple of Elevate scholars here today on the panel to talk about their journey in STEM. The Elevate Boosting Women in STEM Scholarship Program awards scholarships for undergraduate and postgraduate study to women and non-binary people from diverse backgrounds. Applications for those wishing to commence study of a STEM degree at an Australian university in 2025 are now open, and they close at the end of August. And you can find more about this program on the ATSE website under Elevate. This wonderful webinar series today is brought to you by ATSE's National STEM Education Initiative, Stellar, which is designed to engage young people in rich STEM learning at school by using hands-on, curriculum-aligned resources to explore the principles of sustainability and renewable energy. We have over 280 lessons and over 100 hands-on activities for use in the classroom, and you can find out more by visiting stellar.org.au. Along with Stellar, ATSE creates pathways to inspire young people to pursue a career in STEM through our Elevate Boosting in Women's Scholarship Program, as well as our IMNIS Industry Engagement Program to support motivated PhD students with mentoring and professional development. You can find more about these programs on the ATSE website. Yesterday was World Bee Day, so the theme for today's session is Seeding the Plants of Tomorrow. As part of this session, we will explore the significant contribution and pathways our incredible speakers have navigated so that we can better prepare our agriculture for the future. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the host of today's session and our first speaker, Professor Michelle Colgrave. Professor Colgrave is a fellow of our Academy and is the Deputy Director in CSIRO Agriculture and Food. Professor Michelle Colgrave is internationally known for her cutting-edge work in proteomics, the study of proteins, used to improve agriculture and food for the benefit of human health. Michelle's work focuses on providing optimum nutrition more sustainably. Her team supported the development of a canola variety that produces omega-3 oils. Michelle also helped develop the world's first gluten-free barley. Her team is now examining oat cultivars for use in gluten-free diets, and with growing demand for protein globally for their role in food security. Michelle's experience extends beyond research into strategy development for policymaking. She is active in encouraging more women into science. So I believe it is now time to pass over to Michelle.
All right, thank you very much, Emily, and thanks to ATSE for giving me the opportunity to talk to all the students, educators, and the members of the community who've joined us today. Before I get started, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all dialing in from. For me, I'm in Brisbane, so that's the Turrbal, Jagera, and Yagara people. So I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and I acknowledge their traditional custodianship of the lands on which we're all on and their connections to land and sea. Of course, as you've heard, we're gathering around World Bee Day, and while I'm not specifically going to be talking about the science around bees or pollination, I think we all understand the critical role that bees play in agriculture. And if you're like me, you've probably watched the Bee Movie and a few other movies and really connected with the critical role that they act as pollinators and ensuring that our plants have a future. And of course, without plants, we wouldn't have food. And so begins the cycle of life. So we do know that the world's facing increasing threats around food security. We need to ensure that we've got agricultural productivity, and we're also leaning into population growth. And so we're seeing a lot of competition around our natural resources, which is really quite a challenge. So how do we feed the 10 billion mouths that are going to be on our planet, but making sure that we're doing it in a planet positive way? So good for us, but also good for our planet. So of course, ATSE is a great organisation, and its goals include delivering positive influence on key issues for society and also fostering diversity and excellence in the next generation. And with that commitment to a mission to cultivate a skilled workforce, that's also to safeguard Australia's agricultural resources and ensure a secure food future, while also lifting participation from diverse genders, backgrounds. And so we're looking to ensure that we are providing access to STEM education and also having fun as we pursue our careers in STEM. So we're hoping that all of you who've dialed in today can think about your role in the future of Australia's agriculture and food, or perhaps I hear that there's some people dialing in from overseas, so maybe you want to come to Australia and witness some of the great agriculture here. All right, so I've been also asked, I guess, before I introduce our next speakers, I'm going to share a little bit about my journey through agriculture, I guess, but I'm starting with what you might have experienced. Everyone in high school biology has to do a life cycle of an insect or perhaps an animal at some stage. So rather than do that, I've decided to do the life cycle of a scientist and talk a little bit about my my journey. So I'll begin by saying, actually, I was inspired first to think about science when I was in high school. I always thought I was going to be a lawyer, thought I'd get out there and fight the good fight and use my communication skills. But it was a year 10 science teacher I had Mr. Bruce down in Batemans Bay on the south coast of New South Wales, who was just a fantastic science communicator. And after that, I thought, well, actually, science is a great path. So after spending some time at university studying and mostly chemistry, I took on a PhD exploring initially DNA. I was interested and I was studying DNA with a view to solving one of the biggest challenges in health, which is cancer. So I was using mass spectrometry, which is this sort of big box you can see there back in the 90s to study these anti-cancer agents. Moving on from there, I then went overseas and I then started to work in a fundamental instrument lab. So really learning the fundamentals, the physics and the chemistry behind the analysis of these different biomolecules. So I moved from essentially exploring DNA into starting to explore the technology and the measurement of proteins and peptides. And then moving on from there, I returned, that was actually in the UK. I came back to Australia and I moved to Queensland, in fact. And you can see I have got a mention of bees here because in this work, I started to study these peptides. And these peptides are small proteins. They're essentially chains of amino acids. These ones are circular, in fact, and they were derived from this plant you can see, butterfly pea. And this butterfly pea is a legume and it's a beautiful flower. And these peptides are made as defense molecules in the plants. And in the top image, you can see that they've been utilized against these different larvae that affect our cotton plants. And they're able to control the growth of these insects. It turns out that because these are nature derived, they're also now being commercialized as a eco-friendly pesticide. So they can control the agricultural pests, but they're very safe for bees. So after working on those as a postdoc, where I was really studying the DNA and proteins, I then moved on, and that's where I started to work in industry. So I took a leap and left the university, the safe environment of the university, to go out and work as an application scientist for one of the mass spectrometry companies. And in doing that, I found myself in all different locations around the world, installing mass spectrometers and then training people on how to use them. And oftentimes they wouldn't work quite as I expected, and I had to spend a bit of time fixing them. So it was really working under pressure. After that, I moved on and I got a role at CSIRO where I'm still working now. So I've been here now for almost 17 years. But my role there was to establish a new laboratory and a team. And I did that with the mass spectrometers that you've seen so far. From there, I moved on and well, I'm still at CSIRO, as I mentioned, but I moved on in my life stage. And so you can see there a little image of my daughter, who's much bigger than that now. But it was a challenging time trying to balance raising a family, but also delivering science. And so my little maternity leave project was delivering a book called Proteomics and Food Science. And so what I learned was that you could take a flexible work approach, working when it suited you, but also raising children. And I have another child now as well, a son. From there, I moved on to really focus my research around food. And so thinking about how we can ensure the health of our populations. So I've been focused on food allergy and intolerance, and you heard a little bit about my background in studying gluten-free barley. And so we've been focused on understanding the potential toxins and proteins in your food that could make you sick, or those proteins that might be in your food that can also add to the health of a food and deal with some of the diseases, cardiovascular disease and other issues. So I've spent a lot of my research career focusing on those. Moving on, I then started to move into a research management role. And so I led an initiative in CSIRO called the Future Protein Mission. And as you've heard, we're thinking about global food security. And so we started to think about the different ways in which we could feed the population. So whether that be plant proteins, things for like algae and seaweed, or even things like insects. Now, we're not feeding bees to the population, but many people in many jurisdictions already eat insects. And in fact, around 2 billion people around the world eat insects on a daily basis. And so I guess this is kind of the life cycle of a scientist. As I said, I've now in a role where I'm Deputy Director for CSIRO's Agriculture and Food, but I've had this very varied journey to get me here so far. So hopefully that's given you, I guess, a touch of where you might go with your careers. So now I have the great pleasure of introducing one of my fellow panelists, and that is Mandy Walker. So Mandy is a regional business owner and advocate. Throughout her career, she's worked across the agricultural, fisheries, maritime, ports, marine emergency response, offshore oil and gas and regional development sectors. As well with her husband in a heavy-duty mechanical and engineering business, so quite different from me. She's passionate about investment in the regions and ensuring community vibrancy and economic resilience. After completing a Bachelor of Science in Social Ecology at Murdoch University, she entered into the Western Australian Department of Agriculture graduate program, and she spent time in the land using planning and better business programs. She's a lifelong learner. As I've heard, she's just about to sit some exams, and she's completing a MBA in Marine Resource Management and a grad diploma in coaching, amongst other industry-focused certificates. She's currently enrolled in a Masters of Regional Economic Development at the University of New England and is also the West Australian 2024 Rural Women of the Year Award winner. So quite the accolades there. Mandy, thanks for joining us today. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone for dialing in today. It is a great pleasure to speak with you. Super keen to contribute to the conversation today around STEM and careers. Yeah, like Michelle said, I have had a varied career path, and that's why I've used this drawing here. I just really want to dispel the myth that a career is a linear function. It is very convoluted, and it can take many twists and turns, and that's what I wanted to share with everyone today. So I started off in a small country high school, and we had a farm attached to the high school. So a lot of my biology lessons were on the farm. And like Michelle, I had a year 10 science teacher who just opened the world of science to me, and I am forever grateful for that. I went away to uni to study social ecology, and that was a massive eye-opener for me because I'd come from a school where there was 36 kids in my year 12 class and ended up being in a lecture theatre with the same amount of kids that were in my whole school. So those challenges are real and need to be recognised, but they're not insurmountable. And you know, wherever you are, wherever you're studying, you have the opportunity to have that education opportunity as well. So social ecology, I really enjoyed that. That's a mix of environmental science, economics, politics, and it really set me up to enter the Department of Agriculture graduate program. And here we got exposed as a group of 12 students to a whole suite of agricultural sectors. And I worked in the land use planning section predominantly, and that was about protecting agricultural land for ag use. So in the peri-urban areas where you see expansion of housing, you know, we were losing ag land there. So it was a economic and a land use focus. And then as well, I moved into the Better Business program, and that was working with farmers on their strategic plans. So you can see, even though I came from a science background, it was really moving me into a business focus. From there, I had a great job with the Department of Fisheries, and I got to work with aquaculturalists growing marron and abalone and finfish. And all these experiences, they really were a foundation to just build on for the rest of my career. There's a twist there. I moved from where I was living and I had to relocate. So I had to flex and I had to learn some new skills and apply what I had already learnt to the marine safety section at Department of Transport, where we cleaned up oil spills off the ocean. And that was an emergency response role that was very exciting. That the the unknown is very appealing to me, and that's why I think I really enjoyed that role, because we were problem solving all the time, and we were forecasting and using science to predict where oil spills may end up, what shorelines could be affected, what wildlife could be affected, what industries. So you know, a real, you know, a divergence from ag, but really using those skills that I'd gained in my uni time and in my early career. Another bend in the road, in that instead of having children, I just kept following my husband away from the city. And so I had to reinvent myself. And every time he changed his roles, I changed mine. And I think, you know, we shouldn't be scared of you know, the unknowns around changing career, because it's pretty exciting, because as a lifelong learner, you learn new things, and you apply the skills that you've got. So I started my own business, and that was a massive leap of faith to back myself. But again, I felt I had the business skills through my MBA. I'd done a graduate diploma in coaching. So I had some people skills, some business skills, and the science skills to go and do oil spill consulting to the offshore oil and gas, whilst also working in the mechanical and fabrication business as well. And then that last bit there, that regional development piece, I was sick of the commute into Perth from the wheat belt. And so I managed to secure a job in regional development as the Director for Regional Development with RDA Wheatbelt. And our role was to deliver the federal government's Regional Development Charter. So that's around sustainable communities, funding into communities, making sure economies were robust and vibrant. And a key pillar of that is agriculture. So in the wheat belt of Western Australia, ag is our main industry. And, you know, that communities really are really focused around what happens in ag. So right now we've got a dry season here, and it's our businesses that are feeling that impact because of the impact that dry season's had on farmers. So that part for me is that link back to ag, and understanding how I need to flex in my business as a mechanical business because of those seasonal changes. One exciting thing we did do at RDA Wheatbelt was we got funding for a regional university centre here in the region, and now we have 4 study hubs. So students don't have to head down to Perth to study. You can remain in the region, remain with your family and with your jobs, and complete your studies remotely. And now I'm full-time in Walker's Diesel with a bit of work in my oil spill response clients as well. The AgriFutures Rural Women's Award winner, which is fantastic. That's a defence industry project. I'm linking the defence industry supply chain in terms of the stuff that's happening at HMAS Stirling with the submarines back to regional businesses. And as mentioned, I get to be an ATSE scholar as well, which is fabulous. So a little bit on my plate, but it's all doable and all exciting. And what I would really encourage students to think about is not necessarily one career pathway, but all the different things that they'd like to have a taste of and do in their career.
Thank you very much, Mandy. It was incredible to hear about your career journey and I guess how the work that you're doing supports the future of agriculture in Australia, and just all those connections in across, you know, even though you've kind of changed paths, there's always those connections back. And I think we think about agriculture and there's transport and there's logistics and how we get our food from farm to plate and everything else along the way. So really, really interesting. And I'm sure we'll have some great questions, which reminds me, if you're out there, if you've got questions for any of us so far, make sure you pop them into the Q&A session in the webinar, so that we can answer your questions at the end of the talks. All right. So now I'd like to welcome our final speaker for today. That's Emily Cox. So Emily completed her schooling in Tasmania. She was part of the High Achievers program through the University of Tasmania. And she's an ATSE Elevate undergraduate scholar, and she's moved to Queensland to study a Bachelor of Agricultural Science, majoring in agronomy at the University of Queensland. So Emily is interested in how to feed a growing world with limited land through adaptation of existing crop species and adoption of new foods. So similar to, I guess, my journey as well. And those new foods that are not traditionally eaten in Western society. So her dream is to work in the native food industry after she graduates, which will combine her Aboriginality and her love for crops. So I'll hand over to you now, Emily.
Hi, thank you, Michelle. So as you guys have heard, I'm not too far ahead of you guys in my journey. I have recently graduated high school in 2022. So I have always loved growing fruit and vegetables as a child, since as long as I can remember, and have grown up loving maths and science through majorly my mother's influence. I actually had dreams of genetically modifying food to become more productive as a child. However, growing up in a regional urban environment, I did not have much exposure to the research side of agriculture. So believing this was not really an option, I eventually decided I wanted to become an air traffic controller. However, recent history, COVID hit when I was in grade 10 and decimated the air travel industry, so I began to look into other areas. Through chance, my mum was listening to a talk from UTAS and discovered agricultural science, and that they offered a taster camp for year 11 and 12 students. So I went off on this camp, and during it we went around the northwest of Tasmania, getting to see where agricultural science could lead us. Visited many farms, met an agronomist, and even went to their research dairy, which is where I fell in love in the industry and felt this is where I wanted to do. So I studied maths and science in college, or year 11 and 12. And I made the decision to apply for the High Achievers program for the University of Tasmania. So through this program, I got to study 2 university units along with the uni cohort, but while completing year 12. So I chose to study biology of plants and ecology, where I got to go on field trips and take part in weekly labs. The highlight for me was completing a lab book full of scientific drawings of different parts of plants under a microscope, which I would not have had access to at that age through high school. It gave me invaluable insight into what uni would be like and set me up with the skills that I would later need for my studies at the moment. So eventually I decided to move to the University of Queensland in Gatton. Before moving to Queensland, I only knew a few people, so it was a big change moving across the country. One of the big advantages in moving was being able to be immersed in current topics in agriculture and getting to have hands-on learning. So this year I've had the opportunity to work with fall armyworm, which is that little larvae type thing down the bottom right, which was an introduced pest in 2020 to Australia. And through classes and practicals, we've looked at current research being done to form economic thresholds for this pest in Australia to help farmers decide whether they're going to spray or treat this pest. As Michelle said, in the future, I'd love to work in native foods and find ways to successfully farm and commercialise these foods that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have been eating for millennia. This is especially close to my heart, being a Palawa woman from the northeast of Tasmania. And lucky for me, UQ has a partnership with a company called Uniquely Australian Foods that work on research and development in the Australian native foods industry. So hopefully I can work and do a project with them one day. It would be amazing. If there were 2 things I could say to you guys, being in a position not a few years ago, is don't worry about not knowing where you wanted to go, and don't worry to make a change, even if it's scary. I always knew I wanted to go in STEM, but I was unsure on the area. So do some research, as STEM is a wide field, and I guarantee there is something out there that combines your interests. It's also normal to be scared about big changes, and and the change is normally worth it in the end. Even though for the first few months moving to Queensland was very hard, being away from my friends and family and being in a new place all by myself, it was worth it for the opportunities I've gained and the friendships I've made. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. It's great to hear, and I guess especially given that you are still in your learning journey and closer to some of our students out there. I think it's really great to hear from you because, you know, school feels like an eternity away from where I was, I guess. Loved it, but it was a little while ago. So remembering, we also would like to answer your questions, so make sure that you pop them into the question and answer section so we can get to those in a moment. But before we get to those questions, I'd like to just begin by going back to our topic of the day, which is bees. And so, Emily, maybe I can just start by asking you if you could tell us a little bit about the difference between the European honeybee and native bees.
So there are many differences. The major ones being that unlike European honeybees, native bees don't actually make honey. So they pollinate our native foods and crops without taking the honey away. They also have a different method of pollinating called buzz pollination, which enables some native crops and native plants to be pollinated that otherwise European honeybees would not be able to.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Mandy, just like the bee, you have extensive networks in agriculture. So who in your network works with bees?
So I'm lucky to know a lady called Jay Page. She's a fellow finalist in the Rural Women's Award for this year, and she's based at Northam in WA, and her business is Messine's Bee Farm, and her mission is all about education around bees and the importance of bees. So she runs school incursion programs, and they're tailored for the age groups that she's delivering to, but also on-farm tours with teenagers and adults around, what keeping bees is like, how to do it, how important it is for our ecosystem to make sure that we maintain that resource.
That's fantastic. And I think it's really great. And you've heard also, about our experiences in exposure to agriculture and our food systems. It really has grown our passion for being involved in those. And just like you, Mandy, I also went to an ag high school. So we had a farm on, we were really lucky to have a farm on, the school property. And so it was just great to be immersed. Sometimes it was a bit smelly, but it comes with the territory. Right, we have one question in the Q&A, but I'm going to encourage others to add to them. But I also have a question for you, Emily. You had a purple image in the middle of your slide, and it kind of looked like a funky cellular ghost. Can you tell us what that was?
So it was a stem of a pumpkin, if I remember correctly, something in that family. And basically, so we stained it so the different cell types in that stem came up as different colors. That weird little face there is actually the xylem that carries water up and down the plant.
Awesome, thank you. I was really wondering what that was because it looked really pretty, and I love, some of my colleagues are always collecting these microscopy images of different plants and parts, and they make fantastic artwork as well. All right, so one of our questions we have is how much maths do I need to do, I guess, in agriculture? And I mean, broadly, I'd say that you do need maths, and it depends on the area in which you're working. Everything these days, agriculture, I think, has moved on from just, farming as we know it. That we're using things like sensors, we're using drones, we're using all sorts of robots and making measurements, and then we're using artificial intelligence and modeling. So if you're going down those paths, then I think maths is a critical factor. But let me throw to Mandy. What do you think?
Yeah, I use a bit of maths every day. So in my time as a aquaculturalist, maths was important for me from a water quality point of view. So understanding the maths around oxygenation levels in water, understanding growth rates and feed rates. But it's not complicated maths. Once you have learned that process, you apply it. So ratios, that's a key for me in that sense. In the business world, maths is really important when it comes to doing things like my BAS and forecasting cash flow budgets. So everything in ag, down from the dealing with animals and understanding feed ratios or chemical ratios, all the way through the system, right up to understanding managing the business and how money comes in and out of the business, there's an element of maths. So I would encourage people to do maths. In high school, I did discrete maths, so it wasn't calculus and algebra and all of that. It was your everyday operational hands-on maths.
Yeah, great. Emily, you're studying at the moment. How much maths do you need to do?
Like Mandy said, there is a fair bit of calculations in it. I spend a lot of my time on massive Excel sheets at the moment, but it's really not it's not that hard. It's like not high school level maths. You don't stress if you don't know calculus or that sort of stuff. It rarely comes up depending on the area in agriculture you go into.
Yeah, I often think of myself as like I'm an analytical chemist by training, so maths is kind of integral to everything, but I think of it as like recipes. So just like I would go and cook in the kitchen, which I don't do very often, but just like I would do if I chose to, I'm really just about taking the ingredients, which are often, the chemicals in the lab, the solvents and things, and putting them into a recipe to extract proteins from plants or from abalone or all sorts of other interesting things that we study. And that recipe delivers the end product, which I then analyze. So yeah, it is interesting. So we have another question around what subjects we should do in high school. Of course, I'm going to say science, but maybe I'll open up to Emily first.
So yeah, the normal maths and science I would recommend. I did all maths and science subjects except for English. I would also say being in uni at the moment, a humanities type subject like geology, geography, sorry, and sociology might be useful because a big part of agriculture is the human factors side of it. There's no point in us having this fancy new crop or equipment if it's not going to be economically viable to farmers. So
yeah, you make a really good point. And I think one of the things that we are facing and leaning into is this transition towards net zero. And as we think about what that transition looks like, there is a huge social science element to that. So how do we work with communities? How do we work with our farmers and producers to really understand how any science that we deliver, any technology that we deliver will work in their hands, that it'll be affordable for them, but also that it'll be useful for them, and then we're delivering it in the right form. So we have to think about that. But Mandy, do you have any other suggestions?
I would say do the ones that you enjoy, that you get the most fun out of. Because for me, I did subjects like human biology, geography, history, the maths, but I did the ones that I knew I'd do well at. And then I had a couple of challenge ones so that all my energy wasn't put across all challenging topics. There were some that I could retreat to and go, you know what, I really enjoy this study. It comes easy to me and I'm setting myself up for success. And, there's other subjects I can learn later. Learning doesn't end in year 12. So if you can set yourself up some great study habits, understand what it feels like to be successful at study, it's the confidence that gives you to then tackle those more challenging ones, which will set you up beautifully.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think also don't be afraid to fail, or, or to change course. And I think we saw that beautiful winding path, right, with Mandy's. And I just remember I was sitting in a class in university, radiation physics with applications, and we were talking about the maths required to monitor an electron going through a concrete tunnel, and I just went, this is not for me. I'm not enjoying it. I don't think I've got utility for it. So I left that course and I left myself a gap in my degree, and then I picked up something later to cover for it. And then so that change of course, it just meant that 6 months wasn't miserable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all right, so we've got a couple more questions here. So where's the best place to go and study agriculture at university? Ooh, that's a tough one to answer because I don't want to pick any favorites. But what I would say is get out and explore. Go and do some of the things like Amelie talked about. Go to the open days, talk to past students, go and experience that university, because it's not just about the academic credentials, but it's also about the environment. So Emily, maybe you could talk, you've moved from Tasmania to Queensland. Maybe you could make a few comments.
Yeah, so in choosing the university I wanted to go to was, like Michelle said, was a lot of different factors, not just academically and how they went, but also each different university around Australia has different focuses. So, for example, up here in UQ, it's a lot of broadacre sort of focus because that's what the cropping system's like in Queensland. Whereas if you go to South Australia, it's a lot of focus on vineyards or even wheat. So really, if you don't know where you want to go to, that's fine. But if you do have a specific industry or have your heart set on, have a look around and see what universities do focus on that. And also look at other factors such as where your friends and family are, the environment, as Michelle said. It's not just who's best in that industry.
Yeah.
And Mandy, do you have any comments?
And doing things like this, hearing from people, maybe talking to people in industry about their journey. So go meet your nutrient rep and talk about where they went to uni, or go talk to actual, people farming and in farming systems, or in government departments, because they're all going to bring a different perspective.
Yeah, great advice. So besides the Elevate Scholarship, what other help is there if I want to study away from home? And that's I guess a broad topic, and I think there are some scholarships that are available at the different universities that can be accessed. And again, so I think, reaching out and doing you can do a lot of the research online these days to understand what the offerings are. But then it depends, I guess, on what other help you're referring to. Is it just financial help, or is it the support networks that are around at the universities, and also finding a university that has the right accommodation for you, whether that be in a hall style accommodation or in different environments. So Emily, what did you think? What else did you explore when you were studying or looking to study?
Also, the one thing about being out in Gatton is that I'm eligible. I did end up getting it, was the Destination Australia scholarship through the government gives out money to different universities to incentivize people moving to the regions to study. So if you are looking at a university that isn't in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne, then that might be an option. But most universities have a long list of scholarships and financial aid that you can apply for. I found another big support network inadvertently was where I live. So I stay at the halls out in Gatton, and just being around a whole bunch of people being in similar circumstances, being away from home, some people being international, is a big support network for when you do move away from home.
And Mandy, did you have anything to add?
Yep. Yeah, that coming from a year 12 cohort of 36 kids and just I was just blown away by living in the city to begin with, but I lived in student accommodation. So that support network, you could identify with other students that had come from similar backgrounds, and I've got lifelong friends from that now. So if it's your first year, consider student accommodation. I did it for all 4 because it was so convenient, and it was fun too. It really was.
Yeah, I think it is so important to have those networks. I also, when I traveled overseas, after as part of my PhD, I literally packed my bags, moved to England, not knowing what to expect, and fantastic experience. But just having those networks around you to introduce you to the right people, to show you where to go, to introduce you to different foods and cultures, and perhaps go traveling with you while you're enjoying your studies is fantastic. Now, Emily, you also mentioned earlier about your native food interest. So just a question on what's your favourite native food?
At the moment, it has to be a pepperberry, which is a bush from Tasmania that is similar to conventional pepper. But yeah, no, one major thing is what I want to go into is that most of our native foods are people go out into the bush and find the plant and pick it. We don't really have that knowledge of how we farm it in an industrial scale. So
yeah, it's super important to understand, I think, that connection back to our oldest agricultural scientists, and understanding those techniques that were used. I think, Mandy, you mentioned aquaculture, and I believe that our First Nations folks were one of the first in the world to have aquaculture traps in Victoria, and there's still evidence of those original traps. And so, they were way ahead of us in many respects. We've been working also on a milk that is made from the baobab tree, which is a really amazing alternative plant source of a milk type product. So doing that with an Indigenous business. So really interesting. Right. So I think we haven't got any more questions at the moment, but I think we perhaps have a couple of minutes left. I'm looking to Emily to see if we do. But otherwise, is there any other advice, Emily, that you would offer our budding STEM scholars out there?
just get out there, have a look on what different opportunities there are around you. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mandy, anything further that you'd like to add?
Dream crazy dreams. Like, I'm known for saying things like I want to launch rockets in the wheat belt because I think it'd be cool to bring NASA out here, right? I'm working actively with the defense industry supply chain, not to build tanks and submarines out in farming land, but to connect our regional businesses to those that are already doing it down in the metro area. I have big dreams around, taking all the food that is surplus that gets discarded from supermarkets and setting up factories that preserve that food or convert it into soup or whatever it is, make something out of it that contributes to our food security, and we can feed people. It can be used as emergency ration packs. It can be used space food. Who knows, right? Because for me, space is our next area that I just get really excited about. So ag is going to play a really big part in that. The advice is, like Emily said, get out and do it. Don't be afraid to fail. Fail fast and fail often, because that's where you learn. And don't let people tell you that your dreams are crazy, because I have lots of crazy dreams.
Fantastic advice. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to hand back to Emily to do the final wrap up now.
Thank you to our presenters for sharing their career journeys, sharing your insight into the personal journey in STEM, and for excellent discussions that took place. Thank you also to all of you in classrooms who have joined today. We hope that you have something to take away from this session that has left you with a better idea of how many different careers you can pursue in agriculture. We hope that, how this will contribute to seeding the plants of tomorrow. There are more Shape Your Future sessions running this year, and our next session is on Wednesday, the 26th of June on sustainable engineering. Please consider joining us again to hear more exciting conversations with other spectacular STEM professionals who are working in that exciting field. Your feedback is really important to us, so please take just a few minutes to complete a short survey that will appear for you at the close of today's webinar. Thank you for joining us and see you next time.